Welcome to the Supplier Diversity and Inclusion mini podcast series by Fips Consulting. In this mini podcast series, I'll be talking to international guests who will be sharing their experience on supplier diversity and inclusion with me. Today, I'm talking to Krystle Sands. Krystle is the supplier diversity leader for Europe, Middle East, and Africa at Meta. Thanks a lot, Krystle, for being here. Krystle, can you share with us where are you calling from?
Thanks, Andrea, and thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I am calling from London. I've been with Meta for 3.5 years. Most recently moved into the head of supplier diversity role within EMEA. The region looks after Europe, Middle East and Africa. We've got a strategic sourcing team who are based in Ireland with a couple of members in London, and I sit in our London office.
Thank you so much, Krystle. So do you want to share with the audience how Meta defines supplier diversity and inclusion or a diverse-owned business?
Yeah, so my role essentially is to increase opportunities for diverse-owned suppliers to do business with Meta and the communities that we support. And within the company, we have a number of different definitions. So the main broad definition is a diverse-owned company is an organisation owned and operated by a person or persons from an underrepresented community. And those underrepresented communities will vary by region and in some instances by country. So, for example, we have the standard definition in the US, and then that varies by region. In LATAM, we include refugees. In Europe, we have a separate definition to the Middle East, and Africa, we also have a separate definition. And then when we get into APAC, we actually have a definition by country. And it varies, especially internationally, where we don't have recognised definitions by country in some instances. Because of the impact that we want to make, we've decided to proceed on agreed definitions that we've discussed internally with both our policy team and our legal team and our diversity, equity and inclusion teams. And that's how we've come up with the definitions that we've agreed across the globe. What I will say is that we include certified and self-declared suppliers. We know that internationally it's really hard to get certified out of some of the key pockets of areas. So in order to ensure that we can have a diverse and inclusive supply chain, we include self-declared. However, we still have quite a vast majority of our supply chain that is certified, and that is the majority of the diverse suppliers that we work with do tend and have the ability to get certified.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. And I see that at the end of the day, it's all about impact at Meta. That's why you also include the non-certified or the self-declared diverse-owned businesses, which I think is key also, especially in the countries where there's no certification available. So can you share with us when and why Meta actually decided to roll out its supplier diversity and inclusion efforts into non-US regions, namely into EMEA or other regions?
We've had the US program going for a number of years. It was launched in 2016. And at that time, we didn't have a sourcing organisation outside of the US. So Source to Pay was located in the US. It covered all regions globally from the US. We then grew. It was a pretty tiny organisation when I joined, and I was the second hire into EMEA. So we'd had the sourcing director at the time, and then I joined as a category manager, looking after marketing. And at that point, we were starting to grow out our strategic sourcing organisations in LATAM and APAC as well. And Jason, who's the Global Supply Diversity Director, had a vision to grow our programme globally. And at that point, I put my hand in the air and I said, I want to do that. I want to grow the program out in EMEA. So in 2020, we launched the program, spent a long time working with our legal partners and our XFM partners in policy and DEI to make sure that we were doing this in the best way possible and within the legal requirements and the cultural requirements of our region. And eventually got to the point where we could start to measure our baseline, see where we were, and start to chart our course forward and how we were going to grow diverse spend in the region.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that information, and key thing for many corporates to understand that it's not just a copy paste from the US program, but you really need to make sure that you look at all of the data privacy laws and the GDPR and involve legal and all the little things that you don't really think about when you work on a supplier diversity team in the US or in other regions. So EMEA or Europe is very special in regards to that. So leading me to my next questions on how you actually find the diverse-owned businesses or diverse-owned suppliers to work with in EMEA.
So we've got a number of different ways that we identify diverse-owned businesses in EMEA. The number one way is working with our advocacy bodies. So we work with a number of different advocacy bodies in this region. The main two being MSD UK We Connect. We also have a relationship with Out Britain. We've previously worked with the EGLCC also. And that tends to be our kind of number one way of identifying diverse in businesses. However, we've also been really lucky within our RFPs. So we have the question, are you a diverse in business? It's the number one question in our RFPs. And we are so surprised when we're able to identify diverse owned business through that routing. And it happens a lot more often than we think. And just having that ability to identify them really gives them it can give them the support that they need through that RFP process. And we've been very conscious at looking outside of the traditional relationships, the traditional routes that we would look for a supplier. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've been so successful at finding diverse suppliers through our RFP processes. And then we're obviously looking at our kind of incumbent diverse owned companies and trying to leverage them where we can and support growing them. So one of our priorities as a team is connecting diverse owned companies across Meta within different business units. So where they've been really successful in one business unit, trying to support their growth into another business unit. And that's been a strong way of supporting strong performing suppliers, and they've been able to grow really well. So those are the main ways that we've been approaching the searching out suppliers.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think that's also one of the key things and key business cases that corporates are actually doing supplier diversity is to look at companies that you might not look at in previous tenders and really include businesses which you might not have thought about before, and that is really bringing you the diverse owned businesses into the tenders, but also brings you all of the out of the box thinking and the innovation and all the other advantages of having a more diverse supply chain. Yeah. So thanks for sharing that. So in reality, you touched a little bit on it. So when you actually have an opportunity, then how does that work? So you look for businesses that you want to include. How can you share how that works with at Meta?
Yeah, so when we've got the advanced warning that we've got an RFP, and it does vary. Sometimes it will be a last minute requirement. Sometimes we've fortunate to have a strategy and a plan in place for bringing an RFP to market. And in both of those instances, whilst the timelines might vary, we do typically follow the same format. The category managers and strategic sourcing managers are responsible for including a diverse owned company. So we do have a requirement where a minimum of one diverse owned company should be included in every RFP. That's a global requirement. It's slightly different in Europe. We require that 50% of RFPs include a diverse owned company. We don't want it to be a tick box exercise. So we only include a diverse owned supplier if we know that they are a match for the work. We don't try and shoehorn in a diverse owned company to make up the numbers for reporting or statistics. So that's kind of something that is really important to me and the team. So we're looking for project ready diverse owned companies who meet that scope of work. And then our first port of call is always to engage with our advocacy partners. So we'll reach out to Out Britain, to We Connect, International, MSC UK. We'll utilise their database to identify potential diverse owned companies. We'll look internally, who have we already engaged, who are diverse and who can provide the services. And then we'll start to kind of hunt out in, unusual channels. So there are a host of resources on the internet. I remember in my time in the marketing category, there are some great women-founded organisations for production companies, for example, and there's a whole host of information about companies who have joined up to those women organisations, and it might not be that they are diverse owned, but it could be that they are 40% owned by a woman. But we'll look to see if there are any opportunities with suppliers that align in those spaces, and that's generally how we go out and try to identify. We've tried to connect through our networks as well, looking for organisations who sit within our kind of broader network. But the aim is always to try and include at least a minimum of one diverse owned company.
Well, that's very a great policy, and I think it's probably also a big challenge, because I can imagine that not everyone writing an RFP is very keen to do that extra step and look for diverse owned businesses they can include. So how do you make sure that your colleagues and also wider procurement teams are supporting and are really encouraged to include diverse owned businesses in their tenders?
So first of all, we've made it as easy as possible. And that's like the number one thing. People aren't going to do things if it's hard. So we try to move those barriers to make it easy. So the questions are a standard format within our sourcing tool. They're all pre-written, they're all pre-drafted. Everything is already done. So it's a matter of attaching the right documents and moving the questions into the RFP. So, there's kind of no excuses for not including the questions, and then we measure it. So I think that's one of the most powerful things you can do is measure and report on the numbers. So we measure how many RFPs are including a diverse owned company, and then we measure the conversion rate. And that's something that our leadership get really excited about, is the conversion rate. So it's great that you can include a diverse owned company in every single RFP. A lot of companies can easily achieve that, as I said, by shoehorning some suppliers to meet those requirements. But then the more powerful measurement is how many of those RFPs were converted into a contract award, and that's something that we measure and report to our EMEA leadership. We typically have 60% of our RFPs including a diverse owned company. So we're kind of, ahead of our target of 50%. And of those RFPs, we generally find 50 to 60% get awarded. So we have a really high success rate. of converting those RFPs to diverse suppliers.
Yeah, that's really great, and that's a great conversion rate, and congratulations to that. And I think what you said, what's getting measured gets done. If you just have your nice to have supplier diversity, no policy, and just having a program, it might not have such an impact like if you really have your measurements and your KPIs on supplier diversity and also on the inclusion and on the conversion rate, as you said. Unfortunately, we're already at the end of this podcast, but one last sentence or thought that you would like to share with the audience, Krystle.
Yeah, so I think when companies are looking at developing out their supplier diversity program, you need to do so within the realms of the current company culture. So what works for Meta won't necessarily work for other companies, and the culture and the ways of working will have a huge influence on how you roll out your supply diversity program. What are the priorities of your organization? How do you need to map your supply diversity program to that? So I would always take it back to kind of what is the objective of your organization and how can you make sure that supply diversity aligns with that objective.
Thank you so much. And that's such an important thing, that it's not one solution fits all. It's really about how you source, what you source, how is your company set up, and the values and all around that. So Krystle, thanks so much for sharing your valuable insights, and looking forward to see more from Meta on supplier diversity and inclusion. So if you want to make your supply chain more inclusive, reach out via fipsconsulting.com or check Fips Consulting on LinkedIn. If you want to hear more, listen into my next episodes where I talk to many more experts about supplier diversity and inclusion and the impact it has on their company. If you have any inputs or topics around supplier diversity and inclusion you want me to talk about, reach out as well. Thanks so much for listening, and bye, Diverse Owned.